let's make a ladybug. Since there's lots of little bugs and critters crawling all over now that it's springtime. So it's going to be pretty simple. Just paper plate, something to make it red, and I'll go over that. Something to make some black, scissors, maybe a crayon, and some glue. That's about it. So the first thing we're going to do is make our paper plate all red. So one way you can do it is with paint. So you can use pretty much anything as a paintbrush. I'm using a sponge brush, but you could use a cotton ball. You could use Q-tips, so that might take a while. You could even use a crumpled up piece of paper or fingers. That all works. So this would be pretty easy for your student or child to do, and it would be great to work on kind of bilateral things where they're holding with this hand and painting with the other. All over, make the whole thing red. So, but if you don't have paint or want to avoid a possible mess or want to work on some other skills, you can do any one of the following. So if your student is still working on ripping, so you can initiate some rips if they're not quite ready to pull or twist the paper apart in two directions. So help them pinch here and then twist. Pinch, twist, and so on. If construction paper seems a little bit too tricky, you can either cut or rip tissue paper. So you could take just small pieces like this, and if you need to, you can also initiate that rip. And with this one, they can probably pull it apart this way, which is great to work on kind of symmetrical, so each hand is doing the same thing bilateral. And that might be where your student is at, which is totally fine. But they can also work on that twisting motion if they're ready to do that. I just happen to have some red cupcake liners. It's a little bit thicker than tissue paper, but it is also not quite as thick as construction paper. Again, can initiate, cannot, either way. Help them start tearing these, and then you just glue them on. If your student is working on cutting, on straight lines, you can have them work on this so that they're having to cut up and move helper hand up as they go. Or if they are not quite ready to do a whole line, maybe you're just working on focusing the scissors on a line. You can have them work on a strip like this where they just have to line it up and do one cut. And then shift, one cut, shift, one cut, shift, one cut. And then you can just put glue all over the paper plate and attach all these different pieces that you've created. You can do a mixed media ladybug with all this different kinds of red. So I am going to finish making my ladybug red. Now this ridge part is usually a tricky part for most kids because that bumpy surface just kind of throws them off a bit. So you might need to help guide your kids that they can push down the paper with one hand, the paper plate, kind of put some glue on, and then still able to push their paper on to the plate and the glue. So now, of course, there's no wrong way or right way to do this. Anything works. But the idea of completeness and filling in kind of all the space is something that you can also work on with your kid. if you have time and the patience, because sometimes kids don't really notice where there is space, and so working on drawing their attention to when something is not finished or looks different, that kind of helps them be able to problem solve in the future, as well as to compare and contrast things, knowing, this one doesn't quite look like this one over here, and what can I do to make it look more like that one? So when they're writing things or making patterns in math, those concepts will be a little bit more familiar. So I have a bunch of red on my plate, and now I'm going to make some black spots. Again, you can do this a multitude of ways. You can cut out some black spots. If your child is working on large curves, then you could make really big spots and have them work on cutting on a curve so that they start and don't close their scissors, but they are turning with their helper hand. The scissors stay in one spot. Again, scissors are just for squeezing, not rotating. So you could use those as spots. You could make smaller ones and cut them out yourself if those are too tricky and have your student glue them on. I am going to use paint today. So I have some black paint, and I'm going to use a cotton ball as my dot maker. So a little bit of black, and I'm going to pinch my cotton ball, and I'm going to dab it, and I'm going to make some dots. Boink, boink. Ooh, now I've got some ladybug dots. So now we're going to do the line that kind of separates the wings, a head, and some antenna. So this is a great project for kind of starting on those simple foundations for cutting. So after straight lines, we start to work on arches, and so this involves both straight lines and arches. So we're going to need a straight line for the middle of our ladybug, and the thicker you make that line, the easier it is to cut. And so since it's a long line, your student's going to have to manage paper, which can be tricky, but again is something that we work on. So I always talk about how the paper gets floppier the further your scissors get from your helper hand. So helper hand wants to move up and be next to his friend, the scissors. Okay, so now we have a line that'll go down the middle, and then we're going to make a head. So after straight lines, we tend to work on arches to start that work on rotating the paper. And so since we have a big paper plate, we get to make a big arch for his head. And since it's large, it's a little bit easier to cut. So again, managing paper, since it's bigger, it's harder to manage. So remind your student about that helper hand and how this cutting hand is just squeezing. Just squeezing, and I'm not closing my scissors. So now I have the head, and then let's make a couple of antennae. So some more straight line cutting. So I'm just going to make 1, 2 lines. And since this paper's short, If your student had a hard time with the long line, you can have them work on this one because it's going to be easier to manage. And again, the thicker you make the antenna, the easier it is. So if they have really thick antenna, that is okay. Okay, so now I'm going to glue on all of these body parts. So I like to have my students remove the cap as well as work on turning the glue up. Because again, another bilateral task. This hand is turning, this one is holding. And then I call the side that has lines on it from my drawing the icky side. So I put my glue on the icky side so that I can turn it over and it's not seen. Now glue on the head, and this is a great time to also talk about where to put glue. So does your student need glue on the entire head? No, if it's going to get off the paper a little bit. Doesn't need glue all the way. So just remember to talk about those ideas, and if it's a little bit too tricky, you can give them that visual cue of put glue inside the circle or under the line, and you get to work on those language concepts. Like inside, glue the antenna. Again, since it's sticking off the head, I don't need to put glue all the way down. That's going to be too much glue. Grab my other one. Only glue where I need it. And there you have a ladybug. Now you can also add some legs. So this is more cutting if you want. And this could be a little bit easier because it's shorter. So you can go 1, 2, 3 legs. And then chop them. And again, if you're just working on snipping on lines, this is great for that practice of attending to the line, putting scissors on it, and snipping. Now I gave my ladybug very short legs, but if you want to work on those long line cutting, you can make longer legs. I also started all this gluing while my paint was still a little bit wet, so you might want to make or let it dry a little bit before you start that. Another option is you can work on folding with your kiddo. If you wanted to make some eyes, you could practice folding a small piece of paper, so bringing one side to the other, lining them up, pinching with the other hand while helper hand holds, and then you could cut out some small circles for them, and then you could glue them on, and then you could work on coloring inside the lines if you made some lines for their pupils. Or you could take that black paint, kind of make a pupil yourself. So many different ways of going about creating a cute little creature.